is our Electoral College and how does it work? And should the presidential candidate with the most votes win? We're going to be having two panelists today. One will talk about the Electoral College and how it works, and the other one will talk about the National Popular Interstate Vote Bill, which the League of Women Voters supports. It was endorsed by our national league in 2010. Each of our panelists will have 20 minutes. Vivian stole my thunder. We'll do the league thing and have you write questions, and we will have questions and answers after both of the panelists have spoken. The first panelist today is Barbara Norrander. She's been a professor in the School of Government and Public Policy at the University of Arizona since 1990. She teaches courses on U.S. government, political parties, and voting behavior. She's a researcher and specialist on U.S. elections with emphasis on voters' decision-making, election laws, presidential nominations, and the gender gap among voters. Her recently published book is The Imperfect Primary: Oddities, Biases, Strengths in the U.S. Presidential Nomination. I give you Barbara Norrander, one of our members. Yeah.
Well, thank you for, I would say inviting me, but I'm already a member, so but thanks for having me give a talk on some of the election rules that we have. So why do we have an electoral college? It's in the Constitution, and a lot of things that are in the Constitution were the result of compromises, particularly between large states and small states, and that kind of factor. So the Constitution is pretty vague on lots of stuff, but it's pretty vague on the Electoral College. It has a few rules, but it basically left it up to the states to decide how they wanted to select their delegates or their convention electors. So it left it up to the states whether they would even have a popular vote. And there's no national rule about how these electors would decide. Are they completely free to vote for whoever they want? Or are they more what we call instructed delegates, that they would have to follow some kind of mandate either from the public or some other group? Is it working? Yep. So when they wrote the Constitution, they did not include anything about political parties. And the electorate was pretty small, white property men. And communications was a little bit more difficult at that time. So they thought, at least some of them, George Mason, thought that the Electoral College would actually be the nominating board. So the idea is that the electors meet in each state separately. And each of the electors had 2 votes. They might cast one for a national politician, but they might cast one again for a regional or a state politician. And as a result, when the tallies were collected, no one would have the majority, and then that would send the election to the Congress. So they thought that maybe it would be the nominating board and Congress would be selecting the presidents, which would be sort of a quasi-parliamentary system. It never really happened that way because after George Washington, the political parties started to coordinate their voting. The original Electoral College, as it was written in the Constitution, and again, each one had 2 votes. The candidate who got the most votes would win the presidency, and the candidate who got the second most votes would become the vice president. So I think it's John Adams, who was a Federalist, won the election, and his vice president was Jefferson, I believe, and that's from the opposite party at the time. So this is George Washington's first election. So 3 of the states select their electors by the state legislature. 2 use the popular vote based on the state totals. 2 use the district, the congressional district vote, mixed methods, and then the governor. And if you add those up, it doesn't come to 13. 2 states hadn't ratified the Constitution yet, so they didn't get to vote. And New York for whatever reason, didn't get its vote in on time. Oops, yeah. So this is the little table that shows that by the time you get to the 1820s, pretty much all of the states were using the election, the popular vote, to select the electors. I believe it's South Carolina. South Carolina was always the last one to change. Didn't do so until the Civil War. And those states that did use the popular vote early on, there was a split between whether they used the congressional district vote or the statewide vote. But again, you see by the time you get to around the 1830s, most of them were using the statewide vote. So again, lots of controversies even early on. In the election of 1800, the parties had formed and they were coordinating their votes, but someone forgot to tell one elector not to vote for Burr, who was supposed to be the vice presidential candidate. So that's a tie vote, and it would be up to Congress to decide. So because of that, the 12th Amendment was added to the Constitution, that they now have a separate vote for president and vice president. And as a result, you get the party tickets. So the formula for how many electors each state gets has been the same. It's based on the U.S. Census. That's the original purpose of the census, to determine how many people are in the state. And so it's every state gets 2, and then they get the number of House seats that they have. So that gives Arizona 11. The smaller states will have 3. I think there's 7 of those. And California, what does it have? 55, if I'm right. So again, it's based a little bit on population, but also a little bit equal across states. 48 of the states use the statewide vote to determine which slate of electors gets chosen. The 2 states use that old-fashioned way of using the congressional district vote. So the electors that represent the Senate seats are based on the statewide vote, and then the other electors are based on the congressional district vote. So every census brings a redistribution and reallocation of the electors. So after the 2010 election, or 2010 census, the blue states are the ones that gained. It's not how many seats they gained, it's the total. So Arizona, growing faster than the rest of the country, gained, I think, 2 states, or 2 electors at that time. Texas and Florida usually get additions. The Rust Belt is generally the states that are losing seats in the Electoral College. Here is one projection of what might happen after the 2020 census. So the green states, basically Texas and Florida, will probably get at least 2 more Electoral College votes, because they'll get 2 more House seats. It looks like Arizona has a possibility that it might gain another seat. The lightest gray, like Montana, again, also might gain. And then there are the losing states. The orangey one, Illinois is probably going to lose a couple seats. The golden ones are going to lose 1 seat, and it's possible that Minnesota would also lose 1 seat. So this is one reason why the census is so controversial, because a state that has an undercount in the census is possibly going to lose seats, or not gain seats in the Electoral College. So early on, there was no one election day. States could hold the presidential election basically any time in November. In 1845, they passed a law saying that everyone would have the same date for the presidential election. And it's in November because in the Midwest and the Northeast, that's after the crops are in and before it snows. And it's on Tuesday. because it takes time to travel. If you're doing horse and buggy, it takes time to travel to the county seat or wherever you need to cast your ballot. So couldn't be too close to Sunday. And then Wednesday was the market day, so Tuesday kind of fit in the middle. So the electors are chosen based on the vote in the election. These are real people, and they show up at their state capital in the first week in December and cast the official vote for the state. And this vote is then sent to the U.S. Congress, and they count them in January, and that's when the official election occurs. So this was the result in Arizona last time. Donald Trump had 48% of the popular vote. Hillary Clinton had 45%. Trump is the plurality winner, so he got all the Electoral College votes. And the scattered candidates didn't get anything. I lost my picture. There was a picture there of the actual electors for Arizona. And it didn't show for some reason. It shows on my computer at home, but didn't get transferred. They are actual people. They were holding up the ballot. So how are they selected? It's up to the states, and usually it's the political parties. So the Democratic Party will select a slate of Democratic electors, the Republican Party will select a slate of Republican electors, and then the vote determines which of those slates of electors are chosen. From what I was able to read, it seems like Arizona uses the state party chair. That's the only state I saw that had that. The most common way is through the state party convention. They would select the electors. You can see some other variations. Pennsylvania had the strangest one in that the national nominee would select the electors for that state. So typical effects, I think many of us know this, that the battleground states get all the attention, that it magnifies usually the winning margin, and it disadvantages the third-party candidates. So this is where the candidates went in the 2016 election. Obviously, they're going to the states where the vote could go either way, because the win there could turn the election. California has the most electoral college votes, but it doesn't make sense for Republicans to go there because it's probably going to be a Democratic selection there. And it doesn't make any sense for the Democrats to go there because they've already won it. Arizona may be moving into those battleground state positions, which is, it's two sides. I mean, if you're a battleground state, you have to see all those ads and all those annoying phone calls start coming in. So, in Nevada, one year, like, they just ran commercials straight. It was like 20-minute slot of commercials for the presidential election because they're a battleground state. So it's not, you want to be a battleground state, but then on the other hand, maybe not. And the idea is that it magnifies the presidential election. So this is Reagan's re-election against Walter Mondale. So the popular vote was pretty lopsided. So Reagan had 59% of the vote in the popular vote, but he has 98% of the vote in the Electoral College. Walter Mondale managed to win his home state in Washington, D.C. Some people think that magnifying the presidential outcome is a good thing because it gives the president a little bit stronger mandate when he's trying to get those first things done in those 100 days, kinds of factors. Other people might think it's a distortion of what's happening. And then it disadvantages those third-party candidates because they're never a plurality winner in any state to get electors. I always have to explain to my student who Ross Perot was, but I think this crowd probably remembers. So he was that independent who thought that he could run the country like a business. He got almost 20% of the vote nationwide, but did not win in any of the states. So he got 0 electoral college votes. The only third-party candidates that tend to win under the electoral college, and they don't win the election, are regional candidates. So George Wallace got some electoral college votes in 1968. So again, atypical results. 2 times there was no winner in the electoral college vote. So again, the 1800 one where they forgot not to vote for Burr. 1824, by that election, the Federalist Party had disappeared. And there was just the Jefferson Party, which was the Democratic Republican Party, and it was starting to split up into factions. And so they actually had 4 Democratic and Republican candidates running for the election in 1824, which meant no one got the majority in the Electoral College vote, and so it was decided by Congress. Each state gets 1 vote in the House, and you need 26 votes. Now you need 26 votes for that to be the nominee, and then the Senate, they do allow each senator to have 1 vote. 1824, they picked up John Quincy Adams. Then they have the ones where you have the mismatch between the nationwide popular vote and the Electoral College. The first one of those, the 1876, was really directly after the Civil War, and it was when the southern states were starting to try to go back to their previous elites, who were mostly Democrats, versus the carpetbaggers and things like that, who were more Republican. And so they had lots of shenanigans, let's say, going on in the counting of the votes in some of the southern states. And 3 of the states actually reported 2 different electoral college vote totals. So what they did at that time is they established a commission to make the decision. It was composed of members of Congress and Supreme Court justices. And they decided, basically on party lines, that the Republican candidate would be the president. This had to be, because of the situation, verified by Congress, and the Southerners in Congress would not verify it until they got the end of Reconstruction. Benjamin Harrison is the more typical factor, where one candidate has enough votes in the Electoral College, usually by some states they win by narrow margins, and the other candidate has bigger wins in some states, but not enough to win nationwide. So that brings us to 2000 and 2016. Again, we're old enough to remember 2000, where Florida would be the deciding vote. And so the counting in Florida determined the outcome. And then in 2016, that's more typical of that second 1800 election, where one candidate wins by a narrow margin in sufficient states to win the Electoral College, and then loses the popular vote in the other states. And this doesn't always show very well, but that's Los Angeles County. I think this is Phoenix, Chicago, the Northeast, Miami. So big totals in some of these urban areas for Hillary Clinton, but Trump was winning in a variety of the other states. So I think many of us have sort of opinions, pro and con, about the Electoral College. These are some of the ones that are typically given. The idea is it does respect the federalism structure that the U.S. has. It stabilizes a 2-party system, stronger mandates, isolates election fraud within a state instead of nationwide, and they always claim it doesn't dominate the cities, but obviously some cities are disadvantaged. The arguments against it are discrepancies in the vote. It discourages turnout either because people find it confusing and don't vote, or they're living in a state that they know the other party will win, and so they don't vote. And it doesn't really give states an incentive to increase their turnout because they get the same electoral college votes, whether they have a 40% turnout or a 70% turnout. Disadvantages third parties, and there's the small state bonus, which is because every state starts out in the allocation with 2 senators. The smaller states are overrepresented. So each voter in Wyoming, or each elector in Wyoming represents under 200,000 people. Each elector in California represents 600,000 people. Public opinion's always been, they don't like it. It got cut off at the end. There's a newer poll, but essentially it hasn't really changed that much from, and it actually goes back to the 40s, and that also shows that the public wanted it changed in the 40s. I'm not going to talk too much about reforms because I know our other speaker will do that. One reform is just to get rid of the electors. And then the other ways are to distribute the vote within the state based on different formula. So again, they could go back to that district vote, like they did in some of the early elections, and like Nebraska and Maine do today. There's supposed to be a map of Nebraska up there with the one vote that Obama got from Nebraska because he won the congressional district around Omaha. It doesn't require a constitutional amendment. It would make redistricting more controversial than it is today. And even with our independent redistricting commission, we knew how controversial that was in 2011. It wouldn't actually change the outcome in many elections that we've had, except for 2012. If every state had used the district method in 2012, Romney would have won the Electoral College vote, and Obama would have won the popular vote. There's been suggestion of a proportional representation plan, that the vote in the state would be divided proportionally. It would help out third-party candidates. It would still require a 270 electoral college votes to win. So how likely is that? If you look at 2016, neither candidate would have had the 270 electoral college votes. Clinton would have had 266. Trump would have had 261. The Libertarian candidate would have gotten 9 electoral college votes. The Green Party won, and McMullen, who was running as an independent, would have got 1 from Utah. So again, no one would have had the majority in the electoral college vote. So that goes to Congress. Again, the House would pick the president. The Senate would pick the vice president. It is done by the newly elected Congress, so that's, it would have been a Democratic House and a Republican Senate. Congress doesn't have its first meeting until January 3rd. The inauguration is January 20th. So if they have a battle, or if you have states, particularly in the House side, that can't agree how to cast their ballots, if no one is selected as the president by inauguration day, if the vice president has been selected, he becomes the acting president. Otherwise, the Speaker of the House becomes the acting president. I don't want to step on the other speaker's toes too much, but any change in one election rule is going to have a boomerang effect on other election rules. So we don't really have national election rules, we have state election rules. And there's 50 different versions of the state election rules that are used in presidential elections, and that might cause some problems. We might have to wait for 3 weeks for California to get done counting its ballots, because mail-in ballots in California only have to be post-stamped on election day. So they dribble it. And with proliferation of candidates, voting rules become even more important. So my final comment is that every election rule is biased. You just have to figure out which ones you want to live with. And this says that I think the best part of the last man standing election system is that no one ever demands a recount.
As many of you know, the League of Women Voters takes positions at national conventions. And early on, the League voted that they wanted direct election, popular election of president. However, the 90-some pages of the National League positions are printed every 2 years after a convention. And I wanted to give you the opportunity, in case you wanted to see it. The selection of the president is on page 28 and 9, and I made some copies that are in the back if you want to pick it up afterwards. In 2008, the League nationally decided to study the National Popular Vote Bill. And they had in 1970 lobbied Congress for a replacement amendment to the Electoral College, which in 71 passed the House but didn't pass the Senate, so it never became an amendment. So in 2008 they decided this new National Popular Interstate Vote Bill, they would study it, and in 2010 they voted to support it, and therefore we are on record as supporting this bill. Okay, to tell us about this bill, our compact, which some states have already voted to join, we have Constantin Querard, or CQ, who is a conservative political consultant based in Arizona and Phoenix. He founded and is president of Grassroots Partners and Grassroots Direct, including campaign products, direct mail, television, radio production, and more. He established the conservative Arizona Family Project following the passage of the 1998 Arizona Clean Elections Law. And he will be presenting information about the National Popular Interstate Bill or Compact. CQ, it's yours.
This is a six. You get good sound, right? It's about a 6-hour presentation. We do it for legislators. You're getting the same presentation. I'm just going to speak incredibly fast. Well, they said about 20 minutes, so I've got a timer, and I will do my best to stay in it. I'll skip a few slides. I'll go fast over a few because there's a little bit of repeat, but some of the repeat's good because I'm telling a slightly different story, and it helps to kind of set up the context. Let's see if there we go. First of all, the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. It is not about trying to pick the winner. If this is a solution you embrace because your person didn't win the last time and so by God we need to change the rules, you're kind of coming to the process with an unhealthy motivation, and you're bound to be disappointed. Because as was pointed out earlier, you can pick the rule you think is going to work for you, but it doesn't always do that. In large part because everyone who's trying to predict results and saying what would have happened if this had been the rule ignores the fact that if you change the rules, you change how they campaign. To use the vote totals from a electoral college winner-take-all system and say, well, but if the popular vote had been in place, so-and-so would have been president, is to assume that they're absolute morons running those campaigns who, if you change the rules, wouldn't change how they run for president. You don't ignore, 3 out of 4 states if the votes in every state suddenly matter. So if you're trying to predict the outcome based on the system, or if you're trying to change the system to change the outcome, this is going to be a very frustrating process for you. So what we should pursue is not a partisan outcome, but just good policy. because good policy tends to be in the country's long-term best interest. The point with the popular vote really is to right-size, this was sort of my Arizona presentation, but to really right-size the influence so that a voter in any state matters as much as a voter in a swing state. We personalize it and talk about Arizona, but as Arizona becomes a bit more of a swing state, we start to see some of the attention that the swing states get, and we understand why swing states love the system. However, it is still about policy that's good for the whole country. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is an interstate compact that guarantees the presidency to the candidate who wins the most votes in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. An interstate compact is an agreement between states. They use it for a lot of water deals, things like that. Powerball is an interstate compact. It's an agreement between states for a multi-state lottery. That's how you know that if you're in Arizona and you buy a ticket, Minnesota will pay its share of the winnings to the person in Arizona. Minnesota doesn't get to keep that money because they're in the interstate compact. There's a long history of interstate compacts. It is binding law. There's not a lot of shenanigans the states can play with interstate compacts. It basically will take effect when enough states have passed it, that the number of states in the compact represent 270 or more electors. It does no good for a state to suddenly grant its electors to the winner of the national popular vote until enough states are doing it that it changes the rules for everybody. Otherwise, you really do become a spectator in the whole process. So a number of states have passed it. I think we're up to 16 states, about 196 electoral votes. I think we've passed 5 states in the last year and a half, added, I think, 31 electors to that total. So you're getting closer to the 270. Again, it's going to be virtually impossible to get to 270 if this is a partisan effort. There aren't enough blue states, there aren't enough red states that on their own they can get to 270. So again, if this is a partisan thing, it's never going to happen. But if it's the kind of thing where people understand the policy behind it and they want to proceed, it can. It has passed at least one legislative chamber in 24 states. It passed the Arizona House here back in 2016. Never really got a hearing in the Senate and died. Really hasn't been back since. The partisan nature of the 2016 election made it to where a whole bunch of states who were looking at it stopped, and a whole bunch of states who refused to look at it start, because the legislatures have by and large been functioning in a very partisan manner. A lot of the initial energy was, well, they were mad that Al Gore didn't beat George Bush, but he got the popular vote, so by God, let's change the rules. And a bunch of blue states passed this compact. And then the progress slowed down because blue states realized that with the blue wall, under the current system, it's a lot easier to get elected president as a Democrat than it is as a Republican. And so there would be states like Oregon where you'd have more co-sponsors than you needed votes, but the Democrat leadership would kill the bill because it was not in the Democrat Party's best interest to break up the blue wall. Let's leave things as they are. Things are good. So red states start to look at it. So Missouri, Texas, Utah, Arizona start to look at it because they realize that this is sort of an unhealthy process on the Republican side. Then Trump wins the way he wins. The red states go, oh my God, if this had passed, Hillary would have been president, which is not necessarily true. The blue states say, oh my gosh, if we had only passed this before, Hillary could have been president, which still isn't necessarily true. The red states stopped, the blue states started. And so the progress you've seen in the vote count is largely blue and maybe 1 or 2 purple states that currently have Democrat-controlled legislatures. The authority for this, again, is in the Constitution. So it always kind of surprises some audiences to know that you are not entitled to vote for president. So that sense of entitlement, like I want my vote to count, not necessarily supposed to have a vote. Okay, that was going to be up to the states. Article 2, Section 1, that each state may appoint in such a manner as the legislature thereof may direct. The authority belongs with your legislature. Now, of course, you get to pick your legislature, and in the old days, you had a fair amount of control over your legislature, and your legislature was going to be your voice. But the legislature can appoint the electors themselves. They can give that power of appointment to the governor. They could have an essay contest on why the U of A is better than ASU. When I'm up north, I switch those because I get more applause down here. They can do whatever they want to. They can have a lottery. They can literally do whatever they want to, and it is constitutional, and it's been upheld a number of times by the Supreme Court. In most states, obviously, the legislature now has these winner-take-all statutes. That's not going to change, but it is worth noting from a historical context that the people weren't necessarily entitled to vote directly for president. The president was supposed to be chosen by the legislatures because you were supposed to have strong states and a weak federal government. We were a united collection of states. We were the United States of America, and so the strong states would play their role to maximize their influence. We'll skip part of this because it's been covered. Federalist 45, Madison writes about the three powers Congress or the Constitution gave the states to keep the states strong and the federal government weak. One being reapportionment. You draw the lines for your House of Representatives. Congress is beholden to the state legislature because the state legislature can draw them in or out of districts, which is the power to decide really life or death for your congressman. The states appointed the United States senators who were supposed to be there on behalf of their states. Back in the day, there were no arrogant United States senators because you answered to your legislature. You were the legislature's emissary to the United States Senate. That was given away in the 17th Amendment. We now directly elect our senators, so we almost have like two houses basically now. And we have more than a handful of arrogant United States senators because they don't answer to anybody. The third power, which he writes about, is the power over the electors, which keeps the executive branch beholden. So you see they had given the House was beholden, the Senate was beholden, and separately the executive branch was beholden because, as they write, without the intervention of the state legislatures, the president can't be elected at all. You had to pay attention to those states, to the state's needs. You had to listen to the legislatures who were the voice of that state and that state's needs. I'll skip some of this history because you've seen a lot of this, but basically the point was states were supposed to act in their own best interests. So they were playing games with how they were picking their electors largely to maximize their power and influence over the election of the president. That's what they were supposed to do, and the founding fathers went home and did that themselves. We'll skip a lot of history because we've had a lot of this, and look at kind of current races. You saw the map that was up there. 94% of we map basically after the convention. So once you have a nominee, once you step up and say, I accept your nomination, you've got a president and a vice presidential nomination from each party. Those four people, so Clinton, Kane, Trump, Pence, where do they go for campaign events? I don't mean if they drop in for a fundraiser, but an actual public event. If you go to a state just for a televised debate, that doesn't count. But a public event, where do you campaign? 12 states got 94% of all the campaign business. Those are the voters who matter in the states that matter. If you're not in one of those states, you don't matter. Sounds a little rude. I mean, they care about you, I suppose, to a degree, but you don't really matter. You're a blue state, you're a red state, we're not campaigning there, we're not spending money there, we're not asking for your vote. Frankly, we're not terribly concerned with how our policies impact your state because you're a blue state or you're a red state. One of the fellows who works on this worked in the Bush 43 White House, and when they drew the map that says, okay, if things go incredibly awesome, how many states could be in play? And if things go incredibly badly, how many states could be in play by adding or subtracting light blue, dark blue, light red, blue, light red, light blue states. There were about 35 to 38 states that in their wildest dreams, either way, could possibly be in play. And so when they had a policy initiative that they wanted to roll out, those are the states they polled. They didn't even poll the other 15 states. Because why would you? Well, we would like you to, but why would you? And they're not doing it wrong. These are the rules of the game. We set the rules of the game. We elect the legislature picks the process by which our electors are chosen. And of course, as the presidency goes on, the number of likely states shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. Because 4 years out, there's a lot of possibility. 18 months out, there's not a lot of movement left. So by the end, you might be polling 17 or 18 states to see what people care about, because if you're going to roll something out, you want to know how it's going to impact you in the states that are still in play. Almost 70% of the television ad spending and the lower, I think the campaign number is, the campaign event percentage is wrong. Those are not supposed to be the same. But almost 70% of the television ad spending is playing in these four states. For the top three states, I'm sorry. Yeah, 60% would have been four states, but they added, I forget which state it was. 70% of the campaign events going to just 6 states. So even if you fancy yourself a swing state, even among swing states, not all swing states are equal. You saw on that map those big 71s and 53s and that kind of stuff. So effectively, roughly 3/4 of the states and about 7 out of 10 voters didn't really matter to the election of the president. And that's what you're trying to fix, because if swing states are the only states that matter, your national policies start to be geared towards swing states. Okay, so George Bush wins Florida by 529 votes, in large part because he overperformed in the I-4 corridor, which tends to be a senior heavy portion of Florida. He did well with sort of the soccer mom vote in the counties around Cleveland and Cincinnati, and you see that in policies show up. The federal government, which is run largely by the executive branch, tends to favor swing states. Swing states get more grant dollars, they get more grants, they get more disaster relief, often for the same disaster. Okay, when oil hit Mississippi and Louisiana, it was pretty darn sad. But the moment it touched sand in Florida, Obama lands the helicopter. It was the greatest environmental disaster in the history of mankind. And all that had happened in the week prior to that is that they had found the source of the oil leak, what had gone wrong, they had started to fix it, and it touched a swing state. Well, that's a great deal if you're Florida, but it's a pretty lousy deal if you're Mississippi or Louisiana. And that's the problem. It's unhealthy for policy because it creates winners and losers between the states. And most of the states are sitting around locked into winner-take-all rules they've had for 100-something years, not even realizing they have the power to change it. And that's kind of what we ended up doing when we talked to legislators. Medicaid Part D was passed largely because he promised free drugs to the seniors in the I-4 corridor. And he had to keep that promise because if you win a state by 529 votes, you better not break any promises you made in that state. No Child Left Behind was basically for the soccer moms in Ohio. So these are massive trillion-dollar programs that are often passed to curry favors, not even with an entire swing state, because keep in mind, while Florida's a swing state, Miami is as blue as you get, and Tallahassee is as red as you get. There are swing parts to swing states. Virginia, I don't even think is a swing state anymore, but when it was back at this time, Northern and Southern Virginia were like different countries. I mean, forget different states. You know, you had to win Richmond. If you could win Richmond, you get Virginia's electoral votes, which really creates sort of a weird thing. National vote issues tend not to get a lot of attention. So if you are $22 trillion in debt, nobody's really talking about the national debt because, well, that's a national issue. And if I look at the top 10 issues of the voters in the swing states, it's not one of their top 10 issues. So when I'm having my televised debate with my opponent, the whole country's watching, but I'm not talking to the whole country. I know who I'm talking to. I have my list of topics I need to hit. I need the talking points I need to make because I know the swing voters I'm trying to reach. Same thing for my opponent. Now, if you want to really kind of give yourself a little who are the ultimate swing voters? They're the late deciders. This is a fairly partisan room here. There's a few of you who are, oh, I could go either way, but I suspect this is a fairly partisan room. So understand that your fate is in the hands of people who, with 3 weeks to go, are looking at Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump and, I can't decide. But regardless of how you feel about either of them, if you're still trying to figure out the differences between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, or between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, and you can't decide, what issues are you using to decide? Because you're probably not using important policy decisions. Because the difference on the important policies, healthcare, national defense, you want the wall, you don't want the wall, whatever it's going to be, are very clearly defined by the time you get to that level of a national campaign. Republicans and Democrats are different. Okay, they have stark differences, particularly on the really big issues. So if you are motivated by these really big issues, you've decided. So now try to figure out what issues are motivating the person who with 2 or 3 weeks to go still can't figure out which one they like. It is so subjective, it is so emotional, it is so not policy related. And that's how we're picking our president, because the swing voters at the end are really focused. They're not worrying about trying to turn out the base of the party or as many people in as many states as possible because it's all about the totals. At the end, they're trying to cater to some pretty quixotic folks. So that is the challenge when you're in the late stages of a presidential campaign and they're saying all these weird things. You're like, who are they talking to? Well, 38 states voted same way in the last 5 elections. So again, there's not a lot of movement in the map. I will tell you that if we were having this debate 30 or 35 years ago, you wouldn't need a national popular vote because there were 35, 38 swing states. So they were campaigning everywhere. National issues played better. That's why you weren't $22 trillion in debt. But as the country has gotten more polarized, more partisan, the number of swing states has really shrunk down, and it's really magnified this process and problem and created this need. And so ultimately the compact, with all due respect to proportional, a congressional system basically takes the problem we have, throws it on the ground, and smashes it into a bunch of pieces. So instead of 12 swing states, I've got 61 swing congressional districts. Even the map, kind of where we predicted that, you know, Romney could have beaten Obama on a congressional district. Not really, because they would have shifted their campaign resources to the swing districts. Now what happens is the federal government will start to buy swing districts instead of states. Where do you put the military base? I'm going to put it in the swing congressional district, not the other part of the state that's not a swing district. You know, it'll be the same games, but played at a smaller level. And Barbara's correct, it would be create enormous pressure on the redistricting, because now you'd have the national parties in the White House involved in redistricting, with the federal government pressuring the states for how those lines should be drawn, because now you're in the elector business, and you don't want that. That would be unhealthy. I mentioned tiny states mattering. Richmond, 2012, Romney ignites a barbecue war. Mitt Romney sends crews down to run TV ads in Richmond. They film, there is a barbecue joint. Bill's Barbecue is going out of business. And he blames Obama. It's Obamacare, it's all the, you know, the economy's down. And it's one of those institutions like the old Bill Johnson's we used to have. I don't know if you guys had Bill Johnson's down here. But everybody knows Bill's Barbecue. It's like Bill and Men's, I think. And he's running these TV ads, and so Obama sends a crew down. They film ads that are showing in the online. Now keep in mind, the online market back then wasn't very big. But they're spending the money on TV crews to go down the street to a competing barbecue joint where business is booming, and they're doing their ads saying Obama's aces, and this is how we're running for president. We're not even talking about what's important to Virginia, because we don't really care about Virginia. To be elected president, I have to be elected mayor of Richmond. I have to be elected a county supervisor in the I-4 corridor in Florida. I need to be elected a county commissioner, basically, in Cuyahoga County in Ohio. And that's how we elect our president. It's one of the reasons we also select in the primary process regional candidates. We were supposed to pick Jeb Bush and John Kasich because we needed Florida and Ohio. I'm a Republican. My license plate says Ted Cruz. Not a big Jeb Bush, John Kasich guy. The idea that I should pick my nominee on the basis of geography is kind of offensive to me. I don't want to pick somebody because they can win a state. I want to pick somebody who's going to represent my party and my ideals and take it out to the country and sell it. It'd be the same thing on the left. You don't want to pick your candidates based on where they come from. So this is sort of how it matters. Pennsylvania debated this bill. Pennsylvania is a swing state. They said, why would we do this? The day we pass this, we become Utah. Now they could have picked 37 other states, basically, but their point is that we won't matter if we pass this. So a swing state doesn't want to pass it because they know how good they've got it. Arlen Specter was talking about, back then he was Republican, he says, in 2004 when I ran with Bush, when he was running for re-election, so was I, the president came to Pennsylvania 44 times. Always stopping him, Arlen, what do you need? What does Pennsylvania need? Now, I haven't run the numbers, but I think if you exclude fundraising trips, and maybe if you had to exclude this last campaign because we suddenly became a swing state, I don't know that Arizona has seen the president 44 times since statehood. Honestly. I mean, if you exclude the 2016 campaign where all of a sudden we were in play, I don't know that we've seen the president 44 times that didn't involve a fundraiser. And Pennsylvania got him 44 times in 2004 alone because they were a swing state. That warps policy. And if you're Pennsylvania, you're totally cool with it. If you're another state, you should be outraged and saying, wait a second, the Constitution gives me a remedy. I could fix this. I could make them pay attention to me. Again, Arizona may be a swing state, so maybe we just say greedy and say, you know what? Trump said if he wins, he's going to build I-11. I want I-11, so hey, they're finally promising me pork. Like, no one's ever promised us stuff before because we were the swing state before. But as an American, where I'm concerned about the health of the whole country and $22 trillion in debt and stuff like that, I kind of like the national issues to become more important. It's bipartisan. It's not a one-party problem only. April 3rd, 2015, gorgeous shot of Obama getting off Air Force One at Hill Air Force Base in Utah. Notably, it was the 49th state he had been in. He hit whichever Dakota he hadn't been into like 3 weeks later to complete the tour. However, this is 7 years into his presidency, and he hasn't even visited all 50 states. Now, if I was president, I wouldn't get off that plane. That plane is so nice. I'm sure the White House is nice too, but Air Force One, you know. But why would you go to these other states? Like, they're not in play. I mean, yeah, you're president, but where else would that happen? You don't get to year 7 of, you know, of Ducey's administration, and he finally gets off the bus and he's like, hello, Santa Cruz. It wouldn't happen. Okay. But we accept it at this level because, and look, it's not Obama's fault, he's doing it the right way. Utah was never going to be in play for Barack Obama. So if you're winning that political shop and you only have a certain amount of time, you don't go to Utah. But if you're Utah, why would that be okay with you? So turnout is different, obviously. Every party has to compete everywhere. Every vote matters everywhere and equally. Movement within states is less important. There's a lot of migration from California to some other states that are basically fundamentally changing those other states. California's population is actually turning red states purple or blue under a national popular vote. It doesn't really matter where you live, you just got the one vote. At the same time, the issues would also be different. You pick your candidates different because the job is now to appeal to an entire country, not necessarily a group of voters or a region or they come from a particular state. Election day would be different. Right now there's a lot of folks who get in their car and it's time to go home and go get dinner or maybe go vote, and you turn on the radio and the race is over. For president, you can still go vote because you got races for Congress and the city and the counties and all that stuff. But now if you're in California, it's an hour and a half to get home. Right? That's not an attractive outcome. I'm going home. The race is over. It says so on the radio. They called Florida, they called Ohio, they called Virginia. I'm done. No, under a national popular vote, you get in the car, someone's in the lead, and the question is, you know, what happens with all those votes that are left? So it really creates an incentive for every voter to be more active. We're getting towards the end here. NationalPopularVote.com. I brought a large copy of this book, this Every Vote Equal book. Actually, I brought 2 copies so you guys can raffle one or whatever. And I've got another one here if there's somebody who's just a total junkie. If you're here, you're a junkie. If you're watching this on the live stream, rebroadcast at 11 o'clock at night, you may have a problem. You're junkies, and that's good, but send that direct message. Let me know what time you're watching this, and we'll see if we need to send someone to your house. But the book is it's a fabulous book. Chapter 2 is basically all the history, all the constitutional background. Chapter 9 is about half the book. It's basically every myth and objection, and well, what about this and what about that? It's all answered. It's also available as a PDF on my website for free, so you don't have to go on Amazon and buy a copy. It's also easier to search sometimes because you click the links. There's a very full index. So what if there's a nuclear attack? What if there's a hurricane that hits North Carolina? What about recounts? What about faithless electors? It's all in there. Review the no arguments. Okay, there's no one here today to present the no side. I get not invited to a lot of groups that rally for the no side because they don't want to hear the yes side. But review the no side. Okay? Some of the arguments, some of the concerns are legitimate. Some of them are kind of silly. But every one of them, silly or not, is answered in that book. Every one of them should be taken seriously because this is not a small, insignificant thing we're talking about. You can always reach me. I would remind you guys it's constitutional. It's up to the legislature to pick how they want to do this. It is an exercise in state sovereignty. It's the states basically flexing their muscles saying, don't ignore us. They can all be Glenn Close and Fatal Attraction. Dan, I will not be ignored, Dan. This is basically, it preserves the Electoral College. There are some, I know the support, do you know, does the league still want to abolish the college, or did they ever take that out?
I don't think they took that out, but they...
You can't have this if you abolish the Electoral College. This is entirely dependent on the Electoral College. And I would close basically with a reminder that the Electoral College is your friend. So if you kind of come up with that, oh, that darn Electoral College, I'm not all-knowing. No one in this room is all-knowing. This is not a solution we necessarily needed 35 or 40 years ago. This may not be how you want to do things or your kids want to do things 50 years from now. The beauty of the system they created is that every state gets to pick its path. And at different times in history, in the early 1800s, they were doing it a certain way. By the late 1800s, they were doing things a different way. And we have the ability to adapt, whereas those who want to get rid of Electoral College, which is a total waste of time because you're not going to amend the Constitution to get rid of Electoral College. There's no widespread, in spite of the polling, the Democrat Party is vehemently opposed to anything that's an Article 5 movement, so they'd have to go through Congress, and there's too many small states in Congress, even with Democrat representatives, who would never touch the Electoral College. So the Electoral College is your friend. If you're trying to get rid of it, find another use for your time because it's just a really bad investment of your time. Actually, let me back up here for a second. This compact relies on the powers in Article 2, Section 1. In the language, it says that if basically Electoral College ever goes away, this compact goes away. This compact can't survive without the Electoral College. And then again, your electors are your voice. And this is kind of the metaphor I'll use and then close. to understand why the Electoral College is sort of a good thing. The Electoral College is the system the founders gave you so that every state could have a voice. The volume of your voice relates to your size. Yes, we give the little states a bump because they get to count their senators, but again, Wyoming's got 3, California's got 55. Those aren't even close to equal. California speaks with a much louder voice when it comes to electing the president than does Wyoming. However, how each state chooses to use the voice is basically up to the states. And what the compact is basically a group of states that say, I know what I want to sing, but I actually would like to sing as part of a chorus. And I have the right, almost a First Amendment kind of parallel, to sing with other states in a chorus. And we want to sing the same song. We pick the lyrics basically as a group. Okay? That's sort of the metaphor that I use so you understand. 50 years from now, you may want to change the song you're singing. You may decide that the chorus is no longer singing the way your state would like to sing. You'd like to go back to singing on your own, or join some other group, or do some other thing. Okay? And you would rue the day you gave that up and nationalized an election like this when we don't know what the future holds. So that's the genius of it. That's my email address. I think that's the last slide. So I'll just leave that up there in case anybody needs to write it down or shoot it down. Facebook, Twitter, all that kind of stuff. I am a little over.
You're not.
But we'll sit down for questions.
How would the National Popular Vote Compact be enforced? If it passes the states and it was implemented, how would it be enforced if some states had not joined it yet and refused?
Essentially, remember, it's up to each state to determine how their electors are chosen. So once enough states are in the compact that there's 270 or more in there, the only way to become president is to win the popular vote. That's the only way that enough electors will be delivered to you. Now that might be 27 states that do that, and DC, so you've got 23 other states that are still doing it as winner take all. Nebraska and Maine may still be doing it by congressional districts. So you'll have this vote total where you'll win states, and it'll go up on the board, the scoreboard here, the scoreboard there, because this state was winner take all, that state was winner take all, red won, blue won. But there's a whole bunch of votes being withheld because somewhere on the screen is the tally for the national popular vote, and until that number is achieved, they can't put up the gigantic chunk of votes that will decide the winner. So whether you're in the compact or not, once the compact takes effect, the rules change for you as well. Again, you're still running your election, but if you're a state that doesn't matter right now, but you don't like the compact, you're still going to get the benefits of the compact. It's one of the beauties of the compact is they didn't just get greedy and say, we, the compacting states, will give our votes to whoever wins the popular vote in the compacting states. We said, no, the whole country. We want you to pay attention to the whole country. So everybody will get the benefit of it, whether they're in the compact or not, but each state still has the option of getting in or out. Is that kind of answer?
I think so. Okay. How would the recent court decision validating faithless electors affect the National Popular Vote Initiative? I don't know if it would, but...
And Barbara probably would know even more, but there are states that have laws regulating a faithless elector's behavior. Yes. You know, if you don't step up and vote for who you're supposed to vote for, they pull a handle and a trap door opens and your chair tumbles backwards and pops up with a new elector. And the courts are basically saying you can't do that. However, these electors are generally chosen through such sort of a strict kind of review policy. They're generally so highly partisan that faithless electors have never really been a decisive factor, and parties will be even more careful how they pick their electors. You may, if faithless electors become a problem, you may have more states take control to where, you know, the state party chairman or the nominee picks. One of the reasons Pennsylvania does is because the nominee's going to pick, however, if there's 32, they're going to pick 32 people that they know are hardcore supporters who are not going to be faithless electors, and that's the slate that's going to go forward. So it's never really been a historical problem. I don't think the system would allow faithless electors to become a serious problem. I don't know, Barbara, if you got.
There's never been an election that has been affected. Mostly the faithless electors do something for symbolic reasons. So there was a DC elector who didn't vote or something like that because they were protesting that DC didn't have members in Congress that were voting members. So it's more that along that line. There were actually probably more faithless electors in 2016 than in other elections, but for quirky reasons as far as I can figure.
And everyone realizes faithless electors don't vote for who they had signed up to vote for. I mean, like they voted for Kasich instead of Trump, even if they were a Republican elector. Okay, continuing with national popular vote, regarding election fraud, would the adoption of the national popular vote compact diminish or increase the danger of both voter fraud and voter suppression? Do you think?
I think diminish is the correct answer, largely because election fraud, it's real, it happens, but it's fairly small. The reason is because the point of election fraud is to steal as few votes as necessary, sort of for maximum impact, without getting caught. And that last part is really the most important part of successful voter fraud. If you compare the 2000 to 2004 race, Bush wins Florida by 529. At the same time, they were doing a recount in New Mexico because Gore was ahead by a handful of votes. I mean, it was, I forget if it was less than 100, but it was certainly less than 1,000 votes.
Yeah.
They kind of cancel that because Bush wins Florida. It doesn't really matter who wins New Mexico, so they stop the recount there. But both parties now have 4 years to gear up for a fight in New Mexico. In spite of that, and in spite of the fact that New Mexico had certain conditions that would make it kind of, on paper, right for voter fraud, Bush ends up winning New Mexico by, I don't know, like 1,400 votes or 4,000 votes. It was pretty narrow 2004. He actually wins New Mexico. Because frankly, the parties, or whoever's doing all this vote fraud, don't really have the ability to deliver thousands or tens of thousands of votes. Okay? But if they did, if you could have stolen 600 votes, you'd have swung Florida and you'd have swung the presidency. You have the ability under the current system to, you know, whatever happened with Kennedy and Nixon in Illinois, or didn't happen, we'll never know. But you could swing enough votes in a state to swing the electors to swing the presidency. In a national popular vote, it wouldn't matter. Again, we talk about unanticipated consequences. 4 years later, John Kerry is losing the national popular vote, but we had to wait a couple days for him to concede Ohio. He ended up losing Ohio by, I think, about 60,000 votes. If John Kerry wins Ohio, he wins the Electoral College while losing the popular vote by about 3 million. And then what would that do to partisan lines and scramble them everywhere? Because now, what am I supposed to be for? The Democrats couldn't steal 60,000 votes to deliver Ohio. It's too many. You can't organize it. But even if they could, let's say they had the ability to do that, they would have had to steal 60,000 votes in each of the 50 states to overcome a 3 million vote cushion. So it's kind of the difference between that drop of arsenic in your glass of water or a drop of arsenic in a city reservoir. There's fraud, it's going to happen, but they're usually trying to steal a city clerk's job somewhere for something small and it can spill over. If a swing, we know what the swing states are, we know there's 10 states that matter, we know there's 4 that's gonna be really close. I've got 4 years to try to figure out how to steal those votes in those 4 states where it really matters. But at national elections, it's too big to steal.
Okay, I have another question. What is the popular electoral vote amendment, and would that be better than the NPV? That this would require an amendment to the Constitution. I don't know, Barbara, do you know about this?
Well, I know that it's generally impossible to get as an amendment because of the requirements. You need a 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate just to propose it, and then you need 3/4 of the state legislature, well, 3/4 of the states to approve it. So it takes a supermajority in favor of it. And again, some states might feel that they'd be disadvantaged by that process, and so they wouldn't go on. So,
and again, it's so partisan that depending on if the red states think it's good for them, then the blue states will be voting no at that moment, or vice versa. And so you're never going to get 38 states to alter this process. So.
I have a question for you related to the national popular vote. Who originated it?
Dr. John Koza is a fellow in California, inventor. He actually I believe he came up with sort of the algorithms and all that made the lottery sort of the Powerball, which is actually where he learned about interstate compacts. The scratch-off games were all kind of coming out of his brain, so he learned familiarity with the interstate compact process that way. He'd always been fascinated by the Electoral College. I think when he was in college, he actually came up with a board game about the Electoral College. So he's one of those guys. If you're making your own board games, then you're watching this at 11 o'clock at night. But he basically came with he put in a big chunk of the money. There was a fellow by the name of Tom Golisano who basically kind of ponied up the other half of the money that funded the National Popular Vote effort. Golisano was sort of a New York conservative, actually ran for governor a couple times out there as an independent because he thought the Republicans weren't conservative enough. So you kind of had the lefty in California and the righty in New York, each throwing a pile of dough to get it started because they both recognized that this isn't a blue state or a red state problem or a big state, small state problem. 38 states getting ignored, that's going to include pretty much everybody.
There's a question here about the digital voting machines. Can they be hacked so the election results can be inaccurate? I don't know whether either of you are experts on that.
If it's digital, it can be hacked. However, you're back to it's a voter fraud question. You're going to hack them in 50 states, or you're going to hack them in the one state where you can steal the presidency. It's easier to hack it, and a lot of states don't use digital yet. So, yes, if you're going all digital, you should be concerned. You should want a paper backup. I mean, that one should not be a partisan thing because, again, what's good for the goose can be good for the gander, and one county clerk might be red, the other one might be blue, and wouldn't you like to know you could verify the results no matter who's in charge?
I think that we have done visitations to the recorder's office and the election office here in Pima County, so many of us have a pretty good idea of what they do related to it. I have one other question about, could a state decide to revoke its support of the National Popular Vote after it had already joined it, and would this make it unstable? I don't know.
The answer is yes. However, the compact basically has language that says if you are in the compact as of July 20th of the election year, you basically cannot exit the compact until January 20th, which is inauguration day of the following year. There is that 6-month window when you can't get out. And the reason is because the candidates need stability. We have to know what the rules of the game are so we can run our races. It can't be a situation where the state realizes that someone's going to win and they don't like that person, so they jump out in October. That would be chaos. You can't have that. So you can indicate you're getting out. You could even have the vote to get out, but you wouldn't be allowed to exit the compact until after January 20th of the following year. So if states got out, the language basically in the compact says that if, again, we take effect at 270, let's say we're at 275, Arizona's in, but then Arizona gets out and takes us 11 votes with us. Now we're down at 264, the compact falls away, and all the states go back to whatever they were doing before, because you can't have an interruption. So as of July 20th, which is long before the party conventions, everybody will know the rules of the game and how we're going to have the election.
Okay, I don't have any other questions, unless there are some that people haven't picked up. Karen.
So you said they're negatives. Could you just give us a few negatives of the National Popular Vote compact?
It was wondering sort of like what the negatives of the Popular Vote compact might be. I actually don't think there's too many negatives. I do know that I hear a lot of negatives, and a lot of the concerns are confusion between we're a republic, not a democracy, which when the founders spoke it, they were talking about the sort of the direct democracy Athens style versus the Republican, almost the Roman style. And that really has to do with, yes, we are a republic, we're actually a representative democracy. And so I think there are some folks, particularly on my side of the aisle, who are concerned that this is sort of the mob rule. This is the two wolves and the one sheep voting on what's for dinner, and that never goes in favor of the sheep. And so from that standpoint, you try to explain that no, the point of a representative democracy is you represent you elect your representatives to vote on your behalf for a fixed period of time, 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, whatever. Direct democracy is where you don't really have representatives. When you get your ballot, instead of the legislature voting on 1,000 bills, your ballot will have 1,000 bills and you vote on everything. We're not that. The governor is elected by a popular vote. Arizona has a representative democracy. Arizona does not have direct democracy because we elect our president. So that's one. The fraud is a concern. They're concerned it'll kind of encourage fraud everywhere, when actually it would tend to discourage it. The other one is the idea that the big cities will rule. You saw the maps, those really tall towers, that the big cities will dominate and they'll just go to California and Texas for all the votes, or California and New York for all the votes. No, big cities, if you take the 50 largest cities, are about 15% of the national population. If you think of these behemoths like New York, Chicago, but by the time you get to the 50th largest city, I think it's Arlington, Texas, it's like 330,000 people. It's not a big city. Arizona has 3 of the 38 largest cities in the country. Okay, if you include Tucson and Mesa. You don't think of Mesa as a big city, but it's like number 38. So the big cities aren't all that big, and nobody in their right mind would run a popular vote campaign ignoring 85% of the electorate. Conversely, the small town America, which is the areas that are 50,000 population or less, if you add all them up, and there's a bunch of them, adds up to about 15% of the national vote. So that small town America vote is actually the same size as the really big city vote. And the big cities themselves are not behemoths. 3 of the largest 9 cities in the country are in Texas. So is Texas deep, deep blue? No, because the big cities don't perform the way you think they do all the time either. So those are the common concerns. Again, they're usually partisan. Republicans have a fear of this. The Democrats don't want to give up the blue wall. I mean, they've got a heck of an advantage on the current rules with the blue wall the way it is. And there's some states moving into the blue wall and they kind of like it as it is. So most of the objections are partisan. They're not really policy related. Where they are policy related, it tends to do with the idea of sort of mob rule. And they don't want that.
Okay, I'll take a couple of questions.
Yeah, how close is Arizona to adopting the national popular vote?
The question was how close Arizona is to adopting it. It's not. We read a bill in 2016, passed the House, I think 40-16. It was a sort of a bipartisan bill. Had the votes in the Senate. The Senate president at the time just didn't like it, and rules are rules, so you just kind of put it in a drawer and never really got a hearing. That happens. That's fair. Those are the rules. But then the 2016 election made the topic so partisan that it's impossible to have. This is not a bipartisan bill anywhere in the country right now, because everything is viewed through the eyes of my guy or your guy, and that's that makes it very difficult to run bipartisan. So it's not moving in Arizona. There's no effort that I know of to move it in Arizona. I suspect if somebody wanted to start something, they'd probably call me, and my phone hasn't rung on that for a long time. And that's so I wouldn't expect it to be back here for a number of years.
There are two or three hands. Myron?
Yeah, if this passes, do you see the possibility of the country coming together a little bit better? Because each person gets one vote for the president?
What was the question?
It's a good question for both of us to answer, but it has to do with if this passes, do we envision that it would somehow bring the country together, maybe diminish some of the polarization?
Barbara?
Or you want time to think about it? You want to go first?
You can go first, yeah.
Possibly, because I think the election would shift to larger national issues where we should find some consensus. I don't care what your favorite program is. If you're $22 trillion in debt, you're going to lose whatever it is that you care about. So if you're a security hawk, or you're all about entitlements, or you want infrastructure, or whatever you want the money for, broke is broke. And the fact that we cannot come together as a country to even say, hey, what are we going to do about the debt? Because it's not a topic. So I would hope that it would turn the national debate to some national issues. We're still going to disagree. How do you resolve the debt? Cut spending, raise taxes. Let's have that fight, but let's at least agree that we must do something now about that. I'm a big balanced budget amendment guy because that'll force them to make the decision. And frankly, if I had a balanced budget amendment, I could care a little bit less about who gets elected because I know they can't bankrupt my kids. So I would hope that it would take us towards grander, more national issues that impact the country as a whole. Because again, that debate's 90 minutes. Are they talking to those really weird people in the swing states who still can't figure out who to vote for with 2 weeks to go? Or are they trying to encourage the entire country to show up and vote on election day because it's this important? So that would be my hope.
His hope, Barbara?
I guess I'm more pessimistic, because there's a lot of factors that go into the polarization. In political science, we tend to call it sorting more. And a lot of them are not issue-based. They're symbols, identities, things that are not necessarily policy-based, but are emotionally based. And a lot of political science research tends to suggest that voting is more emotional than rational.
Yes, sir.
Is there any country on this earth that uses an electoral college method? Are we the only country that uses it?
What's the
think
question?
so. Barbara?
I think I heard something, it might have been like Italy, but Italy uses members of the Congress or elected officials rather than a public thing. So no, I don't believe so. Also, most countries don't use primary elections. I always tell my students that we're kind of the odd person out.
But that in our case is not necessarily a flaw, but a quirk that owes to our unique birth as a country. We were the collection of states that united together to create that federal government, to do the things that only a federal government could do, which is different from how a lot of the European countries, if you track their history back, it was a kingdom. It didn't start as a bunch of states to gather together.
But it's never caught on.
The rest of the country kind of already had a government in place at the time. They've overthrown
But it's
things.
not so great that they want to change.
Well.
It's not so great that they've broken themselves into states to then copy it.
Yeah, right.
But that may have to do with their resistance to break themselves into states when they didn't naturally occur that way.
There's only about 25 governments across the world are federalism, like the United States. Most of the countries across the world have a unitary kind of structure where the national government is the most dominant. So the Electoral College kind of represents sort of a federal structure that doesn't exist in many of the other countries.
And even if they don't like to sit, they'll want to live here. So.
Okay, somebody had said, let's follow Europe. I don't know if that's such a great decision.
Find that person.
Which I see here. Okay, I want to thank both of you for coming and enlightening us and making me feel that all the work I do on policy doesn't have much effect. but I'll keep right on working. And thank you all for coming.